today, the First Lady, and she's expressed a desire to sing our song. So, here's how we do it. I hope Gary hasn't forgotten the tune. I hope you haven't forgotten the words. I hope I haven't forgotten the words. And I hope you haven't forgotten the words. One, two, three. Take me out to the mall. Me out to the buy me some.
The Monday Morning Quarterback on the 17th of December 2018. We're broadcasting from the Jerry Pippin Broadcast Center and beaming from WBRN Radio and on the Boston Red Network. Interesting Monday morning. We're quarterbacking some news stories. You'll hear when we leave a discussion by several people on Face the Nation, including Lenny Davis. Now, Lenny Davis was an attorney in the Bill Clinton affair. He represented Bill Clinton, and he also represented Mr. Cohen, who has now pled guilty, and he's talking about that particular incident as much as he can. Obviously, the special prosecutor has not finished up all of the information related to Cohen. Manafort won't be sentenced probably till March or February, so a lot of the cases are not finished. The grand jury is still taking testimony. For those that were around for Watergate, remember under Judge Sirica and various other judges in D.C., the D.C. Circ, a grand jury was working there on Watergate, and many of the defendants went down to the grand jury, and they ended up, this was associates of Tricky Dick, pled guilty. John Dean has an excellent book on that, and we highly recommend his book about it, and you can also find him on Twitter. He has now become one of the cheerleaders for progressive causes in general. Thus, what we have here is an interesting situation, but for the Democrats coming into the leadership in the House, the situation is not about impeaching DJ Trump. It is about legislating. And they have chosen, again, this is sometimes very difficult to do because you have all kinds of crises going on, especially with this administration, to work on voter rights, to pass a voter rights bill that will get around much of the voter suppression. And I use the term get around, basically speaking, I should say counter most of the voting suppression that is out there. What will be in the bill, we don't know the final bill, but there should be a automatic registration for all Americans in federal elections. That's why they had motor voter in, where you can register if you get your driver's license or whatever you get, aid, etc. But you should be automatically registered if you're 18 years old in the United States, the continuous 50 states, and that would solve many of the problems, period, there. So again, that is a work in progress, and it appears now the government will be shut down. They call it a partial shutdown, but thousands of workers will be affected by this furlough, and the Trump people are already preparing for it. Now, if it lasts through December, which no doubt it will, it takes about a week basically to shut the government down, and once it's shut down, the shutdown usually lasts for a week or 2 or 3 weeks or whatever, and then there's another week transition period to get it up and going again. So we're looking at the normal holiday period nonetheless next week, with the Santa Claus holiday and, of course, New Year's Eve, etc. the next week. So we could very well go into January and the new Democratic Congress will arrive on the scene and having to deal with this particular issue, something they would really not want to deal with, but they would have to deal with it. And the unfortunate problem is in these deals, budgetary items, and many times you have to compromise. And many of these Democrats have ran on a non-compromise stance, to not compromise. Now, for some of these so-called blue dog Democrats, well, they are all about compromising, but will the body politic let them compromise? That is a big issue that has to be addressed, and we can't address it at this point in time. But if they stick to the basic legislative business, they would be well ahead of the curve. As far as the investigations that are going on, there are many of those. Now they're investigating DJ Trump's inaugural campaign. Well, all these investigations, if they go before grand juries and what have you, they will work themselves out. Particularly if people are pleading guilty to various offenses and dropping. If you look at it right now, the head of staff is a temporary person. There'll be many more people coming in and out of the Trump administration, which happens in many administrations when you get into the second part of it, and more so as you get into the last of the duck, the lame duck, the fourth year. And in his particular case, with all of these investigations going on, there'll be a lot of noise out there, as Mr. Silver would say. The signal and the noise, well, it'll be both signal and both a noise, and this will affect what the Republican Party does and what the Republican Party does not do, and the Democratic Party that represents somewhat progressive people needs to be basically more tactical and strategic in how they handle this. They don't want to rush into a bunch of investigations willy-nilly. The grand juries will do that. And all they need to do is, they say, add up the total card and see where it's going. The monopoly press is jumping on it now. And basically what's starting to happen, no matter what DJ Trump says, well, we didn't do this, or it doesn't constitute a crime. Well, in the Watergate affair, people that paid people hush money went to jail. Now, it is a different time. We understand that. It's possibility not. But the whole situation is very, very tenuous. And we're going beyond. This is another interesting point. We're going beyond the fact checkers. You don't hear that much about the fact checkers. You hear DJ Trump saying that people are lying, people lie. Well, in a criminal situation, which this has evolved into, there is a way of determining who is lying and who is not lying, is bring the facts out. And what is happening here, you're getting facts that are not disputable, that are not only backed up by people that have were involved in it, but by third and secondary factors, in other words, evidence, that they have recorded calls, that sort of thing. Now, if you have a recorded call, and say that somebody said on a certain day to pay some money to someone, and that voice can be certified now. You have secondary information, and it's not hearsay, and you have the individual verifying it in the thing of coin. So when you start having that type of information, you don't need to go to the fact checker. The fact itself stands out. And now this is when things start to change very, very drastically. And once the public decides that these facts, as they did with Watergate, are paramount, not all the public, but enough of the public. And then there's a situation where the Trump people have to start evaluating what's going on. He's roughly at about 41% to 39%, depending on which poll you're looking at, his approval ratings. But if he starts dropping into the 30s, then there is a problem with that administration. What is happening at this point, the Republican Party and the elements of the Republican Party are backing him up. Let's go to Iowa, and we'll hear from some people on these Iowa caucuses here. Oops. Sometimes things move. Let's just hear the commentary here. This was 1968, the beginning of the Iowa caucuses. And then we'll be looking at the 2020 poll, which will be coming up.
The caucuses themselves operate independently of presidential politics and really didn't have much to do with presidential politics until, we could say roughly after 1968.
After that, then, we had this problem of how to nominate a president. Really, because we had caucuses and been using caucuses, that's what got us in the position where candidates wanted to come ahead of time.
One of the effects of 1968 was the rise of what political scientists called independent political entrepreneurs. So instead of the party organization looking for and picking good candidates to be their nominees, increasingly potential candidates decide on their own they want to run, and they build their own organizations. If you think of building a race car, you need to take it out on track and see how it performs. And where do they try out that race car they're building? They try it out in Iowa, because it's relatively inexpensive compared to other states. And the one unintended benefit of Iowa is that, in fact, candidates have to treat voters, individual voters, as real human beings, not simply as campaign props. The 68 effect was to say we have to open up the political process, whether you're talking about caucuses, as here in Iowa, or primaries across the nation. That opened up the process, but did a lot of people go through that door? Not actually.
It did, in fact, open up the door. There was no doubt about that. In 1972, a person that we worked for at the time, Dr. George McGovern from South Dakota,
4 rebounds,
that ran in 1972, and that was a commission, the McGovern Commission. Anyway, this is the Morning Register here. They have some of the candidates here, Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders, top the list of potential candidates preferred by Iowa Democrats. That's in 2020. It's the results of a new Des Moines Register, CNN, Media.com Iowa poll, setting the stage for the contest that will sweep across Iowa in the next 14 months. We're 14 months out. A massive field of Democratic candidates represent a full spectrum of political experiences beginning to take shape. The First Nation presidential caucus, 49% say the right person to defeat Trump should be a seasoned political hand rather than a newcomer. Now, that we'll see how that goes. Former Vice President Biden, that would be good for him, who campaigned for the president in Iowa ahead of the 1988 and 2008 caucuses, was first elected to the Senate in 1972. Tops the list of 20 declared possible candidates in the test poll. 32% of the respondents say he is their first choice. Bernie Sanders, he's from Vermont, narrowly lost the 2016 Iowa caucuses to Hillary the Monster Clinton, followed with 19%. This is fairly close situation here. Well, he's 19 and 32. Well, anyway, not as close, but it obviously is a warm welcome to some people who are readily familiar to the caucus going in the state. That's Ann Salsa. She's president of Salsa & Company, the firm that conducted the poll. It is a Cadillac, incidentally, of polls in Iowa. 36% of respondents say a political newcomer is best suited to defeat the president. In that role, you'd see people like Beto O'Rourke of Texas, and a retiring representative there who narrowly lost his Senate race in Texas to Ted Lyon Cruz. O'Rourke earns 11% of the response, who said he was their first choice. But again, it's a little bit different. Elizabeth Warren, she's at 5% from the Commonwealth. Name ID, of course, benefits Biden and Bernie Sanders. 82% of likely Democrats caucus goers said they would have a favorable view of Biden. 15% view him unfavorably. Not very many there. And just 4% are not sure. Bernie Sanders is viewed favorably by 74%, 22% unfavorably, and 4% not sure. A report from the New York Times, Sanders recently indicated in a private meeting with Warren that he is likely to run, though he's not publicly discussed a timetable for making such a decision. This was according to the New York Times. Matt Paul, a longtime Iowa caucus operative who ran the Clinton campaign in 2016, as the director says, potential candidates who take an early lead in the poll may face more hurdles than those who are low in the polls. That's true, actually. You can be very, very low in the polls and turn out to be the person that is actually winning. And you get these first and second choices here, Bernie and so forth and so on. The second-tier candidates, they have Elizabeth Warren here. You're probably going to see Beto O'Rourke do much better there. And then they have people like Ms. Harris out of California. She'll be going to the California primary. She'd like to leave third or fourth, depending, and Twitter King Booker sent out in New Jersey. I'm not sure how Twitter will do. Booker and Harris over Bloomberg, who gets 6%. Amy Klobuchar, she's from Minnesota. She is a person to watch because she's from the neighboring state. She's at 5%. She's grouped up now with Kamala Harris and Twitter King Booker at the 5% standpoint. She will do much better than 5%. As people get to know her. Beto O'Rourke is the one candidate could set this thing on fire between he and Bernie. Bernie will have a good organization because he has organization out there, and they go on to say a dozen of potential and declared candidates earn support from 1%. If Bernie Sanders taught us anything in 2016, if you can start with nothing and do something, there's no doubt about that. He started with just 3% in 2016, and he would have won the Iowa caucuses. They was cheated out of that situation there. Now, again, another possible contender. Well, some of these contenders you can forget about. They're like Sherrod Brown. He's in the Montana governor. These characters are all trying to run for vice president. Julian Castro, he's out of San Antonio. Eric Garcetti, out of Los Angeles. Kristen Gillibrand is another sleeper candidate there. Hickenlooper, forget him. And Eric Holder, he's not seriously running for anything. There is Tom Sea, I think I pronounced his name correctly here. He is a billionaire. He can fund his own campaign. But there are 14 months out there, and we're at the very beginning of the unknown future. That's according to Ms. Salsa there. This was a poll of 1,838 randomly selected active voters. And it was conducted the 10th to the 13th of December by Salsa and Company of Des Moines, and it was for CNN and some others here. Questions based on samples of 455 voters likely to attend the 2020 caucus. A long time out there. Thought we would bring that one out as a poll moving forward. Now let's move on here. the political legacy of American slavery. We're going to talk about the mud cell theory a little bit here. We've shown that the contemporary differences in political attitudes across counties in the American South in part trace their origins to slavery's province more than 150 years ago. Europeans are currently living in southern counties that had high shares of slaves in 1860 are more likely to identify as Republicans, oppose affirmative action, and express racial resentment and cooler feelings towards African Americans. We show that these results cannot be explained by existing theories, including the theory of contemporary racial threat. To explain the results, we offer evidence for a new theory involving historical persistence of racial attitudes following the Civil War. Southern whites, they call them here, we call them Europeans, better way of doing it, face political and economic incentives to reinforce existing racist norms and institutions to maintain control of the newly freed African American population. Now, this is from Stanford University and from Harvard. It's Matthew Blackwell from Harvard and Maya Say also from Harvard, and one from Stanford. I pronounce the name anyway. For 250 years of American history, white landowners, predominantly from the South, enslaved millions of individuals of African descent. This peculiar institution is sometimes define the social, economic, and political landscape of the American South through this period. Slavery was so critical to the South that one Georgia newspaper editor wrote, Negro slavery is the South, and the South is Negro slavery. Yet, despite slavery's predominance in shaping American history, and despite volumes written by economists and historians on its consequences, political scientists have largely overlooked how American slavery and events following the abolition could continue to influence the South's contemporary politics. Given recent findings on the long-term consequences of past events and institutions, and they name some people here, Robinson, etc., and it would be surprising if fundamental aspects of American history have no persistent impact on American politics. In this paper, we show that the local prevalence of slavery, an institution that was abolished 150 years ago, has a detachable effect on present-day political attitudes. In the American South, drawing samples of more than 40,000 Southern whites in historical census records, we show that whites who currently live in the counties that had concentrations of slaves in 1860 are today on the average more conservative, express cooler feelings towards African Americans. This is the largest number of slaves per capita in this or her county of residence in 1860. So this goes back a very, very long time, a long lineage there. And they quote VOK, and we have used VOK many times here. However, when we estimate the direct effects of slavery on contemporary attitudes, we find that the contemporary share of the African population explains little of slavery's effect. We also test the various effects that are driven exclusively by 20th century population shifts or income inequalities between African Americans and Europeans. We find no evidence that these contemporary factors or theories of population sorting fully account for our results, introducing individual level and a contextual, convariances commonly used in public opinion literature. To explain our results, we instead propose a theory of historical persistence of political attitudes. The evidence suggests that regional differences in contemporary white attitudes in part trace their origins to the late slave period. and that undermine Southern white political and economic power. For example, Du Bois, 1935, Freund, 2012, Key, 1949, amongst those who have argued that the sudden enfranchisement of blacks was politically threatening to whites, who for centuries had enjoyed exclusive political power. And that seems to be the overall consensus going on. There's no doubt about that. Let me just go to one of it before we get to the Mudsill Theory. Despite Trump, what is and what isn't Charlottesville to Boston, and this is by Dr. August. Watching from the image, watching the image from Boston in August on August 19th, and reading the report, I couldn't help but think about how much change in the U.S. Despite Trump. In April of 1976, a major battle took place where a racist gang sought to obstruct a court order. That was Louise Hicks. Boston attracted national attention, not unlike Charlottesville, but unlike almost all of the present crowds, except for the one in Charlottesville, who the main perpetrators is being prosecuted. The one in Boston, without any prompting from white supremacists like the KKK, actually pursued bodily harm against black people, especially black students on the buses. That was a nasty situation over in Southie. The actor Mark Wahlberg, who grew up in Boston in the immediate aftermath of that period, has long apologized for having been seduced by those epogs into actually committing vicious racial acts, evident of how pervasive the climate was in the city, and the iconic image of a bunch of angry whites attacking a black businessman in a three-piece suit who actually had nothing to do with the busing, and a long pole to which an American flag was attached. Spearing, in other words. It was perfectly perfect propaganda image for those who mobilized nationally to defend black youth on the bus. We used that photo in all of our advertisement for building one of the largest marches in the city's history, though not as large as Saturday's August 19th action, which attracted somewhere between 30 and 40,000, thus dwarfing the 50 to 100 who stood behind the police cordon. He's talking about the march in Boston by the white supremacists. They were outnumbered. That was to the Boston Common. To make sure that we could attract the largest number of participants, we not only advertised our march as being a peaceful response to the violent racist gangs, but we actually organized ourselves to make sure that our protests remained peaceful. The march against racist forces was organized by a coalition, and no doubt about that. And not every organization in the coalition was on board with the march being peaceful, though the majority voted for that position. In 1980, another tragic event occurred. That was in Greensboro, North Carolina. We remember that. That was 4 members of the Communist Workers' Party, they were a Maoist party, were brutally murdered, and one severely injured by the KKK. Another example of how much has changed in the U.S. is that Heather Heyer, who was ran over by the 20-year-old James Fields, who has now been convicted. Heyer wasn't a Northern liberal, but a young European woman from Charlottesville, and without a college degree, as many liberals or so want to point out about the Trump supporters. Unfortunately, Heather was a member of one of the organizations, the Industrial Workers of the World Party, which tended to look for confrontation with the racists and the police. I speak from personal experience when I say this. We had to put the IWW members on a short leash when we had our Rodney King demonstration in Minneapolis. Well, that is pure sophistry there. The IWW has been around. We've been a member of the IWW. So again, Professor Nips, and anyway, he's an SWP person. Neither here nor there. It's true. We have to admit that there are indeed individuals and grouplets on the left who do engage in violence and rely upon a confrontation. There's no evidence that they ever higher engaged in any kind of violence, period. They're, and let me finish this article up here. My basic claim is that owing to the profound change that has taken place in the U.S. over a half-century, our side progressive-minded forces are in a better position today to realize such goals than we have been in the entire history of the country. I'm not claiming, of course, but there is a massive working class movement in all of its skin colors, nationalities, genders, is invincible. Only that we are in a better position today than before. The Boston demonstration, the example of having higher, and the removal of the monument is simply the most recent evidence of the kind of opportunities progressive forces have today. August Nips is a professor of political science and African Studies at the University of Minnesota. An interesting situation here. But in Boston, another comment, we covered that incidentally. What happened there was a situation that was totally different in that we had a police commissioner there that had explained to these racist forces that they were welcome to Boston, but they were not welcome to commit any violent acts in the city of Boston, nor were they to bring weapons of any kind. Now, one, they did bust him down and take the weapon away. But what had happened there in Boston was a little bit different. These white supremacists, first of all, were bust in and bust out the common. They were, I don't know, down to 5 or 6 of them that were there. They they were in a police van, a paddy wagon, whatever you want to call it, and they were taken out to a rail stop and a train stop and put out. That was basically it. And that was the end of them right there. Commissioner Davis had told them that anything happened, and on top of the roofs there were the mass highway patrol. And they are known as an equal opportunity baton swinging operation. And they had snipers up there, and that would have been the whole situation, period, there. But as far as the IWW being there on that day, I did not see the IWW formation being around. And elsewhere, one has to realize that amongst the leftist groups, there are a lot of opportunists still out there. The CP was there, also the Boston Communist Party. There were a lot of different people on the scene. Let's go to the Mud Fury. I didn't want to really spend very much time on this. And let me see if I can snatch this up here. The old mud cell theory. This is by Freuner. It's written here. This is the senator from South Carolina. His name was James Henry Hammond. He defended slavery by claiming, although the world of slavery had fallen out of fashion, the institution of slavery continues to thrive in all societies. So he thought. This was his speech in 1858. In all societies there will be a class to do the menial work, to perform the drudgery of life, and the class that requiring but a lower order of intelligence and little skill. Its requisites are vigorous, docile, and such class must have or you would not have the other classes which lead progress, civilization, and refinement. It constitutes the very mudsill of society and of political government. You might as well attempt to build a house in the air as to build a house that either the one or the other, except the mud sill. Unfortunately for the South, she found a race adapted to the purpose, and this is why we start out as we did. And to her hand, a race inferior to her own, but immensely qualified in temperament, in vigor, and docility, in capacity to stand under the climate and to answer all of her purposes. We use them for our purposes and call them slaves. We found them slaves by common consent of mankind, which according to Cicero, Lectionary S, the highest proof is a natural law, and we are old-fashioned in the South, yet slavery is a world discarded by the public by ears polite. I am not characterizing that the class of the North by their term. It is there, it is everywhere, it is eternal. The senator from New York said that the whole world has abandoned slavery. The name not for all things, all powers on earth cannot abolish that. God only has that to do, to repeal the fiat. The poor, yea, will always have with you, and for the man who lives by the daily bread and life that we who put out our labor market take the best he can make for it. In short, the whole hiring class of manual laborers and operatives, as you call them, are essentially slaves. He was talking about in the North what has happened there, and this was the idea of this mudsill to the daily cause over the past year. And this is by Frank Coselli. Anyway, the neo-Confederate Thomas D. Renzo, and especially Thomas Wood Jr., they claim that without an individual state's right to succeed, or at least nullify locally unpopular federal succession, and nullification are necessary for the expansion of states' rights. The mudsill is a theory of economics that helps us better understand the definition of liberty, freedom, and of the self-described libertarians. The Catholic right is about their belief of the right to oppress others. The Webster Dictionary, and what the Oxford has to say, the mudsill as a supporting sill, as of a building or a bridge resting directly on the base and especially the earth. A person of lower social level. The economic theory gets its name from the defense by Hammond. So this is a very good article here, and somewhere we actually have, we can find it. This is from the Herald Leader in Lexington, Kentucky. Social studies should teach more than slavery was good for the economy. Critics of the way slavery, immigration, and native or aboriginal rights are handled in the proposed social studies standard is prompting the State Board of Education members to ask for revisions. Social studies is one of several Kentucky academic standards that must be reviewed and revised on the process laid out by state law. That was in 2017. The standard outlines a minimal knowledge and skills Kentucky students should learn in each grade. Sarah Weston, she's of Danville, asked the state board members on Wednesday morning in Frankfort to reject the social studies content guide because of their approach to immigrants and non-white Americans is not what we should teach our children. Here is what children will learn in American history about slavery. It was good for the economy. She said she's in education, a consultant to education groups. This is not the right thing Kentucky kids to know if only the standards about slavery in the U.S. They should know it was terrible. They should know that enslaving people struggled mightily and boldly for their liberty to protect their families and to practice their faith. Social studies teachers from across the state have been working on revisions of the Kentucky academic standards for social studies. Board members gave the standard a first reading and review and are set to a final action. That'll be in February. According to the Vice Chair, Milton Seymour, more work could be done. Seymour says that as a descendant of slaves growing up in the segregated South, I know that slavery is bad, and I know that a lot of people don't want to deal with that word. But it is history, and we can't simply bypass it because people don't want to talk about it. One of our standards Weston took issue with, describing the impact of slavery and slave trade on the development and growth of the British colonies and the U.S. economy. Whereas the experience of being enslaved, Weston said, and who said that she was not speaking Wednesday as an education consultant, but a private citizen. So this is what is happening now. The committee also specifically reviewed whether there was need to be more detailed in social studies standards about the Vietnam War. So these are some real-time things. And with the mudsill is in the social studies curriculum in the state of Kentucky. We thought we'd highlight that. And let me move along here. It's E.J. Dion here. Sometimes dramatic shifts in U.S. politics go unnoticed. They are buried under other news or dismissed because they represent such a sharp break from long-standing assumptions and expectations. So please open your mind to this. Taken together, the events of 2016 and 2018 election were remembered as the beginning of the end of the gun lobby's power. Supporters of reasonable gun regulations have been so cowed by the NRA's propaganda over a quarter century that we were reluctant to imagine such a thing, no matter how many innocents are slaughtered, no matter how many Americans organize demonstrations and protests. And let's concede up front that the vast, only overrepresented rural states in the Senate tilt the system and undemocratically towards those who claim government is powerless to take meaningful steps against mass killing. In fact, Wyoming and Idaho have as many Senate votes as New York and California. Needlessly, there's a new and a better world on guns, organizingly and electorally. This conclusion is compelled by not by wishful thinking, but by evidence. The investigation in the Russian interference, the IRA had to answer for its relationship with Russian figures, and a visit by the group's leaders to Moscow. Now they name here Maria Buchanan, a Russian agent who courted the NRA leaders. One of the things we need to know about why the NRA is spending on the election, a surge in every category. The bulk of the money went to support DJ Trump. The Post journalist wrote, the key question is, which is being posed openly by Democrats, is no doubt also of interest to prosecutors, is whether the group spending spike was tied to the Russian connection. The article notes that in 2018, the NRA's political spending plummeted while the organization has denied wrongdoing in 2016. Consider historically, Democrats' terror over the NRA took hold in 1994. That was when Newt Gingrich had the contract on America. The Republicans picked up 54 seats and gained control of the House for the first time since the 50s. Many factors explain the outlook, including a backlash against Bill Clinton. By contrast, in 2018, the battle districts where Democrats defeated Republicans were largely in the suburbs, where voters are tired of politicians who capitulate to gun extremists. And now from the exit polls, voters who cast ballots on the basis of gun policy voted for Democrats overwhelmingly by 70%. As much credit goes around for the shifting of the political terrain on guns. Activist students, that was from Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, certainly deserve credit. And David Hogg there, I can think of him, to establish gun control. He marched and drove across, the students did, across the U.S. in buses, letting people know what was going on. And no matter how much propaganda the Republicans put out against him, Laura Ingraham, all these characters, Ingram, just did not cement. Period. This is E.J. Dion here. One of our favorites. Let's go to St. Louis County. This is an event we want to get. This is in August. The Ferguson attorney Wesley Bell won a historic victory. He defeated old Bob McCulloch, the Democratic primary. He became the first African American elected to that office. Well, what this is about is the attorneys in the office now want to organize on a day that would effectively ramp up shortly after Bell's primary victory. The assistant prosecutors in St. Louis County will vote on whether to become members of the St. Louis Police Association. The old McCulloch was there for 28 years. The police had always backed him, donated to him, and he in turn did them. His father was a policeman, and of course he was killed by an African American. The vote puts Bell in an odd position. He's supportive of unions, but officially he's not a party to the union organizing efforts. He doesn't take office until January. The president of the union, Ed Clark, exchanged letters with the county executive, Steve Stinger. In a November letter, he made it clear that the time was of essence in scheduling the union vote. In St. Louis County, workers in the prosecutor's office already have civil protection. So in other words, they can't be fired summarily. We are all protected by civil service rules, but if unionizing proves to be a greater benefit to workers' rights, we support it. That is Sam Alton, Chief of Staff to Bell, the prosecutor-elect. So this is some of the things that's happening here in the races that ran. The election, anyway, is scheduled to take place Monday between 10 and 2 p.m. in the prosecutor's office in Clayton, Missouri. There are 60 attorneys and investigators eligible to vote. And 31 yes votes would cinch it. Bell slayed a giant. He'll find that he's going to battle with an army left behind. And this is an unfortunate situation. Let me just get a date on this. Said 3 hours ago. What's the date? I've always had a problem, but sometimes they don't date these articles. But I'm just guessing it is a recent date. Sometimes you don't get it because there are situations in which things. This was posted to Facebook are older than not there, but I'm assuming it was a fairly current article. Well, we don't know. If it was, it was not a current article. Well, I suppose that will be something we will not find out. But they will do the vote before the new attorney is to take office. Oh, this is December the 16th, so I suppose it is It is there. That's all we have about it. Anyway, we'll do the sports now, and somewhere we'll find ESPN here, hopefully. We always set this up beginning, and I'm assuming we're going to have to set this up once more. Oh well. Happens sometimes. We'll take a break here, WBRN Radio and the Boston Red Network. We'll be right back. All right, the Hawks were at the Nets in Jersey. Nets 144 to 127. The 76ers were in Cleveland. 76ers 128 to 105 for the Cavaliers. The Knickerbockers were in Indiana. Pacers 110 to 99 for the Knicks. The Lakers were at the Wizards in Washington. Wizards 128 to 110 for the Lakers. The Kings were in Dallas, and they beat Dallas 120 to 113. The Heat was at the Pelicans in the Big Easy 107 to 96. And the Raptors and Nuggets 95 to 86. And on to the the National Hockey League. The Golden Knights of Las Vegas in an overtime were 4-3 over the Rangers. The Coyotes and Hurricanes. The Hurricanes shut out the Coyotes 3-0. The Flames and Blues in St. Louis. It was the Flames 7-2. The Sabres and Bruins in Boston. It was the Sabres 4-2. The Sharks and Blackhawks in Chicago. It was the Sharks 7-3. The Lightning and Winnipeg Jets in Winnipeg. In an overtime 5-4. The Oilers and Canucks. It was 4-2 for the Oilers. So thus we have closed this out. We'll have a little brief interlude with the people from A Faced Nation, where we have Lenny Davis there talking about the various machinations with the special prosecutor and also a former head of the election commission there also talking about this. And then we'll have a little bit of the round table. If we have time, we'll put that in. Have a good weekend, everyone. We'll see you soon on the 17th of December, 2018, from the Jerry Pippin Broadcast Center. Good day.